This is a webinar on supercharging your enterprise AI, building modern data products using modern techniques and libraries that are available today that weren't available even just a couple of years ago. So it's really cool to see how fast this space has been moving. My name is Paul Lacey. I am the head of product marketing at Ascend.io. I'll be your host today, and I'm joined by the super talented and illustrious Mr. John Osborne, field CTO.
I don't know about illustrious.
I beg to differ there, John. But yeah, no, John is a former practitioner. What do you call yourself, John? A recovering CDO?
I'm a recovering chief data officer, yes. For those of you that either know a CDO or have been one, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Happy to be here. And I love these topics, especially like the forward-looking stuff. Architecture oftentimes is based on a lot of history and all that, and now we have some new ground to tread, which is always exciting.
That's right. Yeah, and John, you've led very large data teams in the past, so you understand both the tech, you understand the non-tech, the politics of things, and how you actually get stuff done in organizations, and what you have to, the things you actually have to do to package these projects, not just deliver the outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. It's very, very versed in how to avoid the kind of hype curve and still get work done. So it's really good.
That trough of disillusionment has killed many a good project.
Yes, it has.
But yeah, we're going to be talking about that a little bit today too. So yeah, great to have you with us, John. Thank you, and thanks for dialing in from London as well. I know you're on the road right now, but really appreciate having you here with us.
I am. Thanks.
Super.
Yeah, it's we have customers all around the world now, which makes my job even more fun.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and get into it. So what we're going to talk about today is 3 steps to integrating your data with an LLM. We're going to talk about what are the use cases that LLMs are good for these days. We're going to talk about choosing the right method and tools to do this. And then we're going to actually build the pipeline. So don't go to sleep on us. We're definitely going to be spending some time in the console, banging away with code. We're going to be talking about the nuts and bolts of how this stuff gets done, as well as the theory about what you can do with these new types of systems and how you can use them in a number of different capacities. So this is going to be great. I know that our marketing team built this as like the actual useful AI webinar, and that's exactly what we're going to deliver today. We're not going to just bore you with a bunch of theoretical stuff, what you might be able to do, but we're going to talk about what you can do today. So that's going to be super fun. And then I guess towards that end, John, this is the slide that you have kicked off a number of your workshops and talks with and stuff, which is the AI projects are actually difficult to deliver.
I'm a little practical and a little conservative, so I say 80%, but Gartner says 85% of these types of projects fail. And I think we're going to end up talking about that a lot this 45 minutes or hour. And that's the nut to crack for lots of organizations. The kind of the left side is, in the case of ChatGPT, is like almost fully automated. Somebody trained it for you. You just have to figure out how to prompt it and ask like really interesting questions of it, and it gives you an answer. But then still, now what do you do with the answer? And how do you prompt it? And how do you automate all that? And that's where a lot of the executional challenges lie for organizations, for sure. Certainly the existing and potential customers that I talk to, that comes up very often, like almost every conversation. So this is a favorite topic of mine, especially since being a more practical practitioner in architecture and data, like I do like to understand what the business value is and what we're actually trying to do with this project. And then how do we actually succeed with it? Fun topic for me.
For sure. And I think the ultimate point of talking about this kind of stuff is how do we stay in that 20%, right? Fools rush in kind of thing. But how can we as practitioners make sure that we set our projects up for success as opposed to doing the very logical, sensible things that the 80% of people are doing and then coming up with those outcomes that are not necessarily desirable, right? So what can we do?
The interesting thing is the very first couple of projects are deemed to be successful because nobody likes to fail, and we like to spend some money, and we like to be successful, and we like to talk about that. But then when you go to scale it and you say, all right, now I have 2 models running in production. Now I want 30. And like getting from 2 to 30 is a whole nother problem to solve than going from like 0 to 1 or 0 to 2. I think those are, it's easy to have your bias toward early success and think the rest is going to be simple. But we'll talk through that for sure.
Yeah. And a lot of it has to do with the quality of the data, John, and just the readiness of the organization. I know we've got some stuff here, which is we've been talking about data maturity for a long time in the industry. And so everyone's going to roll their eyes at the slide and say, oh my
I
gosh,
know.
yet another one of these things that tells me the steps I should be going through and where I am and all this
Yeah.
kind of stuff. But it's real, right? That's the thing, is the reason why everyone talks about it.
Yeah.
It comes down to, wait, this is a real thing.
I had one
Yeah.
of those original slides that's like all boring, and I said, let's take a little bit quippy approach to it, and instead of just manual data, let's call it toil, and let's call it dashboard purgatory, because that's what people feel like when they're on the left side of this diagram. Even though everybody wants to be on the right side, and they're actually delivering all these things and doing all that stuff. And in the last bullet point on the right there, I created an entirely new revenue stream from cross-domain data, which is yay. If you're doing that, you're on your way. And I just probably can't help you very much other than automating your data. But the rest of it is real. And I think all companies want to be further along in the journey than they are, but it's hard to invest in this stuff because it's hard to build a business case sometimes. So
that's right. Yeah. If you are in that latter cohort, go ahead and raise your hand and come off mute. You can present the rest of the webinar if you'd like.
Exactly.
No, but it's true. It's when we start to look at where folks likely are, and you look like it's just reality in a lot of cases. And it's different for sometimes different departments and different organizations too. Like I'm a marketing leader, and I can certainly say that our team still uses a lot of Excel spreadsheets. Like love them or hate them, they have a place in the business world for sure. We automate a lot of our pipelines because we have access to great technologies like Ascend that helps you automate the collection of these data pipelines and then build dashboards off of it. But yeah, the default is, hey, let me just go and collect all these numbers by hand and pop them into a spreadsheet because I'm familiar with that environment. I'll start doing my work there. And before you know it, you're stuck. Every single time there needs to be a weekly update to a particular metric, I gotta go and do the work on Sunday night to make sure that the stuff is ready for Monday morning exec call. And it's just a lot of people just default to that space, and then they wind up in a situation where you can't just go from there to AI, I think is the point that we're trying to make, John. You gotta actually have these things be repeatable and automatable in order to build models around them. So,
and I think, and then culturally, the organization, as much as technology is doing things from left to right on this diagram, the organization is also becoming not only more intelligent about how to manage and use data, and maybe develop a disdain for a spreadsheet that's just kicking around and nobody knows where it came from versus a really high quality dashboard. But as you move to the right, the org becomes more demanding of, I want to do data-driven things. I want my business problems to be pinned in data-driven solution. And I want to champion people who are doing stuff with data. Like in a flash of brilliance, this is like your first awesome data project that you got across the goal line and somebody finally did something amazing with data. Those are the projects that, as you go to the right, the org starts to change its mindset, right? So if you're starting on the very far on the left and you want to jump to the end, there's going to be a whole bunch of friction there because the organization won't be prepared for it likely. And neither will your data systems and all of that. Although you get maybe the first project across the goal line, or it's a shadow effort, or you have a couple really smart data science people who got something awesome done in this container in AWS somewhere, applying that across an organization at some reasonable scale is definitely challenging. And I don't know that there's a way to like skip this journey and this process, because it's a process. It's a learning process. It's a maturity process. And it comes with mistakes that you have to correct for, and learning about your org and learning about your market and your customers and what they care about as far as what you do with data. And all of that will guide this journey, and you'll find your own place. No company has the same journey as another. But at some point, then you can start to repeat these things and you can start to become like a fully automated, at least in your core business, maybe data process. One of the companies that, having come from insurance a little bit, that did a good job trying to do this early on was Lemonade for rental insurance. They had a fully automated bot that would actually sell you stuff and do all these things. And the point isn't whether they did a great or bad job of that. The point is that was their model, was like, look, we're going to do all of this with data. We're going to do it all with these insights. And they did it about almost now 8 or 10 years ago now. So I can't imagine the cool stuff that's going to be possible going forward, but it requires a high level of not only organizational fortitude, but also technologically advanced techniques in your environment. So,
absolutely. Yeah. So assuming that folks have geared up for this journey, and I'm assuming that you actually have some data pipelines that are processing data from various places and getting it into cloud data warehouses where you can work with it and do all these cool new machine learning type things with it. That's where we're starting from, right? With an assumption, John, is you've got those things in place. Hopefully you have a high degree of automation around those things, because you don't want to be in that business of, hey, chasing down why is the pipeline broken again for the 50th time this month, and
Right.
how do we get this stood back up, and the dashboard getting accurate data out again. Like, hopefully that stuff is behind you, or very soon to be behind you, because the stuff we're going to talk about next is going to be the real fun stuff that you can start doing on that as a foundation. So let's talk about
Yeah,
use
Paul,
cases, right?
if you wouldn't mind, go back to that one more time. I want to point out it's a
Yeah.
nuance also on this slide, and not to we want to talk about LLMs and stuff, but not to over rotate on this. But my favorite column is the green one, because that's where the transition from internally focused problems, or like troubleshooting and like problem resolution, translates into solving customer problems. So you go from this internally focused stuff to this externally focused agenda in your organization. And that's a really important transition. Not to be underestimated, one, how difficult it is, but how important that is too. When you start to talk about customer impact for data versus my pipeline's broken and I can't get my report, that's a whole different mindset. So
Good
great.
point. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for calling that out. All right, let's do the fun stuff. Let's talk about LLMs. Most people think about LLMs, the primary use case is the Copilot use case, right? Especially in data engineering, data design, which is, hey, can you write a SQL query for me? Or here's a SQL query that I've written. Can you optimize it for me? Or things like that. So that we'll take that as a given. Of course, you could have a Copilot, and a lot of people do that are developing these kind of things. But what we're actually want to go beyond that with today is talk about how can you use LLMs in your pipeline? Or how can you use LLMs as part of your process, right? And what does that enable today that didn't used to be a reality before? And there's kind of three places where you can really plug these things in. The first is early on in the pipeline. LLMs can actually help you get access to completely new types of data that traditionally were not accessible to you, that you had to lean on your data science team, for example, to use natural language processing to extract things from your unstructured data files, your audio, video, unstructured text files, things like that you might be working with, or probably not working with because you just didn't have this capability oftentimes. You can now start to get that information more and more readily into your pipelines and structure it, and then start to use it and process it alongside your traditional structured data sources. So that's a really interesting thing we'll dive into a little bit more here in a second. Mid-pipeline, a lot of people are starting to do LLMs where you pass the LLM some data in the middle of the pipeline and say, hey, tell me something about this data. Can you summarize it for me? Or can you pull out this? Or can you pull out that? And that's a really interesting use case we're going to actually look at a little bit of today as well, John, to do some sentiment analysis and things like that. Basically say, yeah, hey, LLMs can actually review things and give you data back in the middle of your pipeline run, which is something that's really unique. And before putting together this deck and doing the research, I wouldn't have necessarily thought of straight away. It's really interesting applications that some folks are looking into. And then finally, there's the post pipeline, which is, okay, now I've got some cleaned, enriched business data, and I've got facts about my business now that I can then pass to LLMs and have LLMs give more accurate prompts to people, whether those are internal stakeholders or external stakeholders. I can basically enrich my LLM responses by adding additional context and using techniques like Retrieval Augmented Generation, things like that. There's like a new category of kind of data integration into LLMs as well. So there's these kind of three different stages, right, that we're going to take a look at.
Yeah, and Paul, I really like the acknowledgement that a lot of vendors and tools in this space have an LLM that is a co-pilot and helps you do your daily work. And I use it almost every day too. I'm sure you do. If you're not, you probably should try using it every day for a week and see what happens to your life. It might improve. Certainly, I'll probably get more value out of the $20 from OpenAI than I do out of Netflix every month. But whatever. The point is though that those co-pilot activities, although they're helping you get work done, they're not actually delivering direct business value, right? They're maybe because you're doing work a little faster, but they're not really directly involved in the processing of your data and applying this technology to your business intelligence or business logic so that you can actually derive better data products out of your org. Certainly they're efficiency tools. And there's a little bit of value there for sure, but they're not directly involved with driving a higher quality insight or by recognizing a cohort more precisely or something in your data. So I think that's an important distinction, and one that is easy to think you're helping your business by using Copilot, which you are, in fact, a little bit, but you're not really driving revenue or sales or customer satisfaction with that stuff.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the demos we're going to have today are super focused on the second, which is these three stages of LLM and AI and ML implementations and pipelines.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and we have to take a step back sometimes and remind ourselves that there is AI techniques besides large language models, even though they seem to have taken
Yeah.
center stage recently.
Yeah.
um,
And LLMs have been around for a long time. So my cynic architect is like, yeah, they've been around forever. They're just easier to use now, and the compute is better, and of course, so that's why we should use them now. So I get, I don't know.
mhm.
But
Yeah. No, it's interesting when marketers get involved, how much hype can happen. I'm guilty of that sometimes too. It's, oh my God, this is the best thing since sliced bread. But there are some amazing things that are now available. And if we walk through these in a little bit more detail, in the early pipeline use cases, unstructured data extraction is now 10 times easier than it used to be. And I come from an unstructured background, John. I know you've spent a lot of time in this too. I worked at a Hadoop company for a while, the pain of doing MapReduce jobs and things like that. I worked at an OCR data extraction company for a while. And I just remember not that long ago, maybe 4 years ago or so, the state of the art OCR was you had to set up in a template for every document that you wanted to extract information from. And God forbid that document should change at all in its structure. You should get a new document into your pipe because the whole thing would be, oh my God, like now I don't know where to look for if it's a mortgage document, the origination code or the seller license, blah, 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 blah. It's incredible where we've come from that as being the state of the art a couple of years ago to now we're going to show DocumentAI in action here. Like you can just pass it a document and ask it questions and it can just get that stuff. It trains itself. It learns over time. Hey, this is a mortgage document. And so there must be these fields. I'm going to look for them. And these are the parameters and I'm looking for, and all this kind of stuff makes it so much more accessible than it used to be. And that's just phenomenal to see happen in the last couple of years. So
yeah, it's
impressive.
absolutely true.
And the other thing is the unstructured text analysis. A lot of us know and have heard the three letters of NLP for quite a long time in the industry. And it used to be something that was in the realm of the data science team. And you'd stick the data in the data lake and they'd come and pick it up from there. But I think nowadays, more and more people are starting to realize, hey, there's libraries that I can use as a data engineer, as a pipeline designer. I can just start to call in these libraries and start using these techniques right away, which is really interesting as well. I can tokenize things now pretty easily. There's hundreds of libraries out there that do that. And so that step of the process is now much more accessible to processing these unique data sources like PDFs and semi-structured JSON, unstructured complete text that you just scrape off the web or off of product reviews or things like that, that now all of a sudden you can start to run some structured analytics around, which is quite impressive to see.
Yeah, and I think the important part that to acknowledge is like these by early pipeline, what we're saying is these are activities that are done at ingestion times, so you can convert this data into something that's queryable, or you can do analytics against it or something. You got to get it into a format that a database can actually give you answers with. If you're doing this stuff at the end of your pipeline before, moving that stuff as far left as possible has a ton of value for sure.
Yeah, so we're going to see some of that in action for sure. And then I think mid-pipeline, we're seeing more and more applications of enrichment and synthesis, right? And we mentioned this before, passing these data to LLMs and asking questions, saying, can you classify this for me? Can you tell me the sentiment score? Can you summarize this really long transcript of a call center interaction into what are the three things that happened, or what's the next immediate step? And in understanding that's not going to be 100% perfect, but you can still get some really useful output from these kind of things. And so I think that's another area where as we start to think about the ROI of our data projects, we can start to inject some real value. Some people might even say magic into this layer of this step of the pipeline as well. And think about, man, there's just things that we can do now that we couldn't do a couple of years back. And we're going to show some of those here today. We're using NLTK and library and other types of frameworks that we can then use to do these kind of analysis much easier and faster than before.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. These type of analyses that are now possible they're gonna change the way call center operations work. Hopefully, it'll reduce training time. It'll help do quality control for humans on phones. It'll help drive automated chatbots and things that are actually much better at their job than maybe they have been in the past. So it's really exciting to see some of the stuff going on.
Yeah, definitely. And I can't wait to get into the specifics. But one last layer that we talked about was getting the data into LLMs as a output. So essentially a lot of it has been said around hallucinations and LLMs, and they always come up with an answer or not. But there's newer techniques that are coming out, in particular model fine tuning and retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, which actually allows you to give more context to the model. So in the case of fine tuning, you're actually training the model on your specific data set. So there's a lot of feedback loops and things like that, where you take your private data and you bring it to the model and you train a subset of that model on your data. You put together an ensemble, and then you have essentially a model that is more smart about your particular domains of data than the publicly accessible model usually is. And lots of folks, even OpenAI, announced they're doing this now. So you can go work with them and they'll create custom GPTs for you based on your private data. Requires a lot of data to do this, but it is definitely possible to make these models smarter in your particular area of expertise and your particular types of data. But then the other interesting one is this retrieval augmented generation is getting more and more speed, where you can actually take your data and encode it and embed it into a vector database, and which is the language that LLMs speak. And then behind the scenes, when a user writes a query, it can query the vector database. Your prompt engine can query the vector database, grab the data that's around the concept that the user is asking about, and append that to the prompt. So it happens completely transparently to the user, but you're basically like giving ChatGPT the answer before it even gets the full prompt, and saying, the user says, how many customers do we have today? And then you're giving it the information that says, according to salesforce.com, we have 1,200 customers today. And then you append that to it, and then the ChatGPT just has to match up the things and then give the answer back to the user, which is really interesting way of working with LLMs, and potentially really groundbreaking in terms of getting your factual business data into an LLM without actually having to do all the work to retrain it and things like that and refresh it on a regular basis. So very interesting field. I included the source to the blog post about this. It just came out a couple weeks ago. Highly recommend you scan the QR code here. Go look at that post, because it's very comprehensive, actually.
It's fascinating.
Libraries that you can use and things like that. But yeah, I know, John, this is a passion area for you too. You've been studying RAG since it was invented, right?
Since it's a 2023 term, I think. I don't remember ever seeing it, maybe the end of 2022. But I think that the important part, if you take a step back from it, is like very few organizations can afford to actually train their own LLM. The amount of data you need, and like the amount of expertise and like all this stuff that you need to build this LLM is really extraordinarily expensive. And so you see the big companies like, of course, OpenAI and Microsoft and Google, and they're doing this giant training activity. And I think the brilliant part about the retrieval augmented generation is that it allows then companies who can't afford to do that to actually inject value into those prompts to get the models to focus very deeply in on the topic that they actually care about. So instead of going in with a white sheet of paper, you're focusing this LLM on the area that you care about. OpenAI is calling these things new GPTs, right? Which are focused on specific topics or specific concepts or whatever. And I think this type of technology is amazing because it allows it then to be approachable by most companies. I think a few years ago, when the data science team I had in my healthcare org was looking at these things, it was almost impossible to train your own model. You didn't have enough data. You didn't have enough expertise. You didn't have time. Couldn't afford it. Like the compute was too expensive. Like all these problems were there. So the best we could do is maybe a semantic model or something, which isn't really an LLM. But I think if we had an LLM and we had a semantic model and we had medical terms and stuff, and we had that like as of right now, you could actually do it for real. And you could get this thing to production, and it would be really high quality. So I think if you're not familiar with retrieval augmented generation yet, you will be for sure, because this is how your org is going to interact with some of these global LLMs, like the giant vendor LLMs. And this is how you're going to need to interact with it to drive value out of them. Not that you couldn't have small models yourself, but it's not the same as the models that OpenAI and those guys are working on. So,
yeah, it's going to be pretty cool to see these kind of technologies become more commonplace and start to see AI be useful in those types of end user applications as well, where, like I said, like you can get knowledge base information into a chatbot, or you can get BI information into a chatbot and have the chatbot start answering questions and that sort of thing, which is really fascinating to see. So it'll be fun. So let's switch gears, John. So now that we've gone through the types of integrations that you can do with LLMs and with this kind of new category of technology, let's go into the implementation of this. I think this is one thing that you like to talk about a lot, John, which is it's not just the model that's valuable, right? It's actually all the data and the automation around the model that makes it.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I'm not aware of a single LLM that actually gives you the red box right out the gate. You have to, like, if you're a business who has customers and you take their money and you give them the value back, that means that you have things like marketing databases and customer CRMs, and you have inventory maybe, and you have products, and you have all this other business data that revolves around your cost of doing business and like how you interact with your market and how you compete in your market and like all of this stuff. When you're solving a specific maybe point solution with a model, you're going to need to wrap data around that solution to actually drive value out of it. So even if you're using, let's say you're using an LLM to figure out what the sentiment is for somebody's blog post, and you want to respond to them, you still have to mix in like an email address or like some other information about, hey, we noticed you did this, and all these kind of other relevant data that you need to combine to create a business valuable output. So it's really the next generation of business data products, which include these AI components at the various life cycles. This particular diagram only shows it in the middle or toward the end of the pipeline, but eventually pipelines will have this technology spread throughout them. And the point is you're combining this business context and the valuable business data that your business has along with this technology to actually drive your outcomes. Along those lines, you're going to have a high level automation. You can't have a little Python script that sits off somewhere in some Git repository that you run once an hour with a cron job. That's not going to work. You're going to have to automate this stuff so that you have a way of doing things like governance and things like audits and all of those other types of activities, which are going to become burdens for LLMs going forward for sure. And it's already happened in healthcare. You've seen some news about, oh my gosh, this model was wrong and it caused all these problems and all this kind of stuff. We're early on and mistakes happen. I don't know how that one happened, but like the point is this run it off in the side in a separate little org with a couple of really smart data science people. That sort of org is not going to be sustainable. It's going to have to pull it back into the enterprise data flows, which is going to require automation.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's also just the speed at which you need to be able to move with these things too requires that automation as well. It's easy to create, like you said, the first couple of AI models because they're based on a lot of data sets that have been historically hardened in the organization. And maybe they're core to the BI applications and stuff that data engineers have been creating for over a decade or longer. And those things are ready to go today. But then quickly you reach the end of that and you realize, oh my gosh, we need 5 more new data sets in order to create this new data product. And it's, well, we'll get back to you in 6 months with those 5 days. No, we need them in 6 weeks or less. Let's talk days if we can, because we just got to get this data and we got to get it in. And to get to that velocity of generating new data products in the organization, you've got to get out of the business of let's manually stand up yet another ingestion connector and let's run it in production for a few months and find all the quirks, and then we'll really harden these pipelines. No, you got to get this stuff out. You got to get it running. If it fails, you got to have automation that tells you exactly what went wrong and you can go fix it and rerun the pipeline instantly. You just got to get that speed into your organization.
Oh yeah, totally. I think if you're doing this stuff by hand, you're already behind or losing. The ability to like suck data in is super important. And then acknowledging that these models, almost every single one of them is an estimation tool, but your inventory, for example, is not an estimate. It's like a very precise number. And you're going to always be living in this world where I'm using these estimators and these language models to help me come up with really creative or complex answers. But I always need to pack real business data along the way in these pipelines to actually produce something useful. So,
Absolutely. So all that said, to get into actually making this stuff real, there's a couple of kind of initial conditions that you need in your infrastructure. John, we're going to show you some examples where you need support for third-party Python packages for sure. You want to make sure that whatever platform you're using to do your transformations and things like that is got to be able to pull those things in and use them right away. You can't be beholden to your vendor saying, oh, hey, we're going to Snowflake release this new cool thing and we're going to take 6 months before it's available in our UI. So you can't use it today. You got to be able to just say, no, I want to run the packages I want to run. I want to be able to do the research. I want to be able to go. So that's one thing. As we talked about, native OCR is an initial condition. That's a requirement for the demo we're going to get into. Ideally based on generative AI. So as I mentioned before, you're not doing templates of documents. And so every new document needs a new template, but it's AI based. And then you need data lake storage capabilities for sure, because we're going to be talking about a lot of unstructured data sources. So you can't just smash it into a Postgres table or something like that. You're going to have a landing zone for all that stuff. And then future proof, right? You got to have something that is able to grow with you as you go. A lot of different solutions are out there. We're certainly not advocating for a particular one. We have our strong beliefs in Ascend, and we build great technology, and we really enjoy working with folks and helping them be successful. That aside, our approach to these sort of things is we want to just show you how to do it in general without necessarily advocating for a particular technology set.
Yeah, the world is not getting less complex, even with the help of LLMs. Architecture still has to survive, and it still has to support your org going forward. Being flexible is a key component. This sort of frozen middle data architecture just won't survive if you also need to go and do all of this, use all this new tech to help grow your business, or if your competitors are already doing it. You just have to be more flexible. You have to be able to ingest from multiple places. You have to be able to use the new model when it comes out in 6 months that we haven't ever heard of before. All of that is going to be absolutely true. And companies like Snowflake and Databricks and Google, GCP, like they're all investing and working really hard on producing new stuff all the time. And you have to be ready to leverage those things, because if you're not, your competitors are going to, for sure.
Absolutely. All right. I'm going to hand the controls over to you now, John, and you can go ahead and get us into the demo. This is going to be fun. Yeah. So let me go ahead and stop the share. You can grab the screen.
Perfect. So we're going to go through a couple of demos here. I'm going to do a little bit of demoing, but maybe a little more talking, but I'll run a couple of things too if that's super interesting for folks. But the two things I'd like to demo here for some specific reasons. First of all, I want to do a quick demo of Snowflake's DocumentAI technology. It's really massively improving really quickly, and it's awesome. It's a tool that allows you to take like PDFs, form data, like Word documents, all kinds of different interesting documents, and actually process them using an AI engine that you train. And so building a pipeline around that is super important, and we're going to go through that real quick. And then the second demo actually uses Gen AI, OpenAI. I've wired a pipeline up to that, and we're using the natural language toolkit, NLTP, to do some sentiment analysis. And we're doing all of that processing actually on a Databricks environment. Again, we are passionate that you should use cloud technologies. Our opinion is you should do that. We have vastly less opinion on how and what the right tool is for your business. That's always your choice. In this case, showing both Snowflake and Databricks technologies. Both of those are the big gorillas as far as database compute and storage go. So they're going to battle it out here over the next couple of years for sure. And I just wanted to take them both for a test drive. So let's talk about Snowflake first. This is, for those of you who haven't seen Ascend, this is what Ascend looks like to a human user of Ascend. When we look at the diagram here, just in normal human readable form, I'm asking a question here in this demo. So which buyers of mortgage property, or which buyers of mortgages have previously purchased a mortgage with us? So I'm ingesting some PDF data. We're going to use DocumentAI to process it. And then we're going to combine, again, combining with business data is super important. We're going to combine some customer data with the outcome of this DocumentAI, which is not relational. It's JSON data that we have to flatten. And then we're going to produce a couple of business outcomes. One is I want to know people who are submitting mortgage requests, which ones have bought in the past, and which ones are new buyers. So pretty simple scenario, but it's not simple when it comes to the number of boxes that it takes to actually solve this problem. So here in this end world, the teal boxes are ingestion. We're ingesting some mortgage PDFs here. This is the actual DocumentAI function in this process flow. Ascend is going to automate not only the flow through this particular component every time a new mortgage document is added, but also then process the data downstream. So let's look at this really quickly. This is the SQL function. Snowflake's done an amazing job of wiring the actual prediction algorithm into a statement. How this works in the Snowflake world is they have a little console that lets you upload some test documents and train the model. And now we're using this model here, which is an LLM, to actually decode these PDFs and actually output data. So if we look at what the records that are coming out of this, you can see the outcome here is JSON data with some information from the documents. So that's the actual AI step. In Ascend's world, it's a little underwhelming actually, because it's just a query, but there's a ton of work going on behind that. And Ascend is going to automate that entire thing for you and allow you to put in quality controls and that kind of stuff if you so desire. Downstream, because we're on Snowflake, I'm a huge fan. I did the flattening both in SnowSQL, but also Snowpark. The SnowSQL is pretty simple. We're just taking the JSON data and flattening out a few fields and giving them actual relational columns so that the outcome is a relational table that we can now query and we can use it for something useful. So we've taken, and just in a couple of steps, we've taken this mortgage PDF, we've gotten JSON out of it, and we've flattened it into something relational. And then herein lies the actual challenging part where, again, back to the high failure rate of these projects, this is the part that's left for the end of a lot of these projects, or isn't at scale, in that I might have customer data, for example, coming from a CRM. Maybe my customers are in Salesforce or HubSpot or some CRM tool, and I have a customer master data set. I actually need that data set in order to make these two determinations. I want to know who's bought from me before and who hasn't. So in order to do that, I need to be able to have this data available or ingest it if I don't have it, and then actually write some queries that figure out, like in the document, which users are matching up with the documents and not. So even downstream, taking a name off a document isn't enough. You still have to take that name, you have to match it up with your customer names, which is not a trivial thing either, and then convert that into maybe a customer ID. So you can see here, we're actually looking for customer IDs out of this list when we match them up. And even these areas of the downstream AI work, Paul, this is an example of one of your downstream technologies where I know Snowflake and Cortex and a few other vendors are working on this. Doing name matching is still really hard. It's not a simple activity. There's misspellings, there's misinterpreted OCR, there's all kinds of things going on that make it difficult. And so even going downstream and doing the matching with your business data is not a trivial activity. Again, back to the high failure rate, acknowledging how complicated this is really important. And then just to show off a little bit of Ascend while we're at it, flexible pipelines rule. So if I'm going to add a column here in the middle of a pipeline in Ascend's world, that's bread and butter for us. We're going to go ahead and execute that query and propagate all that downstream. Those are the types of activities that Ascend is really going to help drive. So back to the flexibility point, if this DocumentAI change happened 2 weeks ago, actually the morning of the demo, they rolled out an upgrade or a change to the DocumentAI function, which broke this one. So I left it in here. I left this query in here. This is the old query, which no longer works but Snowflake changed the API for it. And so I left it there as a case study in the flexibility of Ascend, because in about 15 minutes, I had a new query in here and then just rewired the lineage to point to the new query, and we're off to the races. So back to the flexibility and automation, all of that stuff's key, especially when you have tens or hundreds or thousands of pipelines for sure. And getting this stuff done is non-trivial. So you can see Ascend is coming working through this. So that's a quick DocumentAI demo. I'm sorry to have to go so fast, but let's move on to a Databricks demo using GenAI and a natural language toolkit. Again, the business scenario here is that I have some reviews from IMDb and Amazon. These are like readily available data sets. The IMDb data actually comes with sentiment scores already built in it, which is awesome. Great, awesome. But I have data from Amazon reviews that does not have sentiment scores. So now how do I solve that problem? And then how do I combine all this data and then get my customer emails written so that I can give the customers feedback automatically using GenAI? So in this case, then the pipeline is going to ingest the Amazon data. We're going to pre-process it using the NLTP. So this is the tokenization process of removing stop words and little words that aren't really meaningful, and then run it through the Vader sentiment analysis, which has been around for a long time, by the way. This is not new stuff. The NLTK is still highly relevant, but it works, it serves this purpose really nicely in this case. And then, of course, combining this data back at the end, it's not hard, but it's not trivial either. You have to make sure your columns are aligned and all that kind of stuff. And then generating emails using OpenAI. I figured lots of people are using this for marketing stuff or just regular like blog posting and those types of things. So let's use it in a demo. And there's a couple of things here that are important. One is you need a list of prompts. So if I have a negative sentiment, what's my prompt to get my email? What language do I want to use to tell OpenAI how to write this email? What tone do I want it written in? What words should they use? How long should it be? How many sentences? Like all of that sort of prompt data needs to be in there. And you got to have an array of them. So maybe you have a spectrum of customers, or maybe you have customers who have bought a particular thing and you want that prompt to be slightly different. So this is going down that retrieval augmented generation road where these prompts now become business context specific. And then I still have the problem of anytime I'm doing marketing, I have to take into account people's marketing preferences. I still need to join that together and say, this person said, don't email me. So I need to remove you from the list because you said, don't email me. And maybe that exists in Salesforce or HubSpot or something, right? So I still have to combine all of this data together before I can even write out the email bodies that I want to like bulk send. So if that's the scenario that we're looking at, let's actually look at how this works in Databricks actually. Again, the TO boxes are ingestion spots. I happen to be pulling this stuff in just from static sources. It could come in from live, other databases, REST endpoints, whatever. For the purposes of a demo, I have 50 or 70,000 records out here in S3 bucket. The IMDb data is already scored. There's really not a lot to do there other than to make an adjustment to the sentiment because I wanted the sentiment to be a 1 or a 0. We needed that in the pipeline. The Amazon Prime reviews are a little more interesting in that here in this step, we have to do some tokenization and use NLTP corpus and organization to actually create the data set that we're going to process. So if we look at the outcome of this, this is the process text that we're going to use. It's not highly refined, but you get the point across that we're pre-processing that. And then we're actually going to do the sentiment analysis here in the middle of the pipeline, still toward the left, toward ingestion, but this is where we're actually going to call the sentiment analyzer and actually create a sentiment outcome and add it to a column here in the database. So in this case, then I end up with some records for each movie. I have the email address of the person, and then I have what the process text was, and then of course a positive or negative sentiment. I also have the score here from the sentiment, so we can do interesting stuff with that too. But these two data sets aren't identical, so then combining those together is still non-trivial. So if I'm running Python code like kind of one-off and I'm doing this stuff like in a notebook, or I'm doing this like on my laptop, or I'm doing this sort of offline, these steps can't be underestimated how difficult they could be, where I need to actually union these two data sets together. You can see I need a review source. I have to change the name of some columns. I'm changing some data types here from numbers to strings, etc. Processing this stuff downstream and using the outcomes of things like DocumentAI and NLTP are really important. But then let's look at the most interesting part of the entire process. If I have some prompts here, I just put in two for this particular example, a negative prompt and a positive prompt. So if somebody gave me a negative sentiment, my prompt is compose an email to apologize for poor performance, etc. And keep it short. Don't offer to make amends because ChatGPT wants to be nice and say, "Oh, we'll send you $25 at Starbucks." I'm like, "No, I'm not sending you $25." But actually, for the positive ones, it's, "Hey, like that was awesome, and here's $25." So again, this is an example of business managed prompting, but I need a way to host this data and then inject it into the pipeline and then change it over time. Like maybe these end up being prompts that are driven through marketing campaigns. So I have different language, I have different like outcomes and maybe links I want to use. I can use all that data to feed into the model. And then when I actually call OpenAI in Ascend world, it's a Spark thing on Databricks. I'm going to create an actual raw OpenAI request. We're actually using GPT 3.5 because that's what my license has. And we're actually posting it to the completions endpoint in OpenAI, and then just taking the response back as JSON. So if we actually look at what happens here, I get yet another JSON document out that I have to do something with, because embedded in this JSON response, I have the actual prompt data, and I have other stuff too. It's really interesting, like some statistics that OpenAI gave regarding the outcome of those results. And that's very common for many models that there's a metadata surrounding the answer, like the likelihood of truth or not true is there. So all of that stuff becomes really important to you as a practitioner of data. And then, of course, combining that stuff, again, is not trivial. I have my sentiment data, I have my marketing preferences, and I have the email bodies that I want to generate. And of course, I only want to do the marketing ones where you haven't told me not to. This is a pretty trivial query, but the point is I have to take all this data and align it and then produce an outcome that's up to date. In this case, you'll notice I have 3 responses missing because I had 3 emails drop out. And so we actually writing this data out so that it can be consumed by our emailing bulk email system. Yeah, although this demo looks really simple, this particular demo uses no less than 3 modern AI tools, but I'll call them all modern for sure. But then it also like wires the pipeline together and keeps it all not only synchronized in that each step along the way is managed by a sentence scheduler, but it's also super flexible. So I can start to do even more interesting things. If I would need to fork a flow and do something else, I can absolutely do that using Ascend to create even more complexity, and again, be flexible and adapt to future things. This is capabilities that like notebooks and handwritten Python and these frameworks that you would use on your laptop just are not necessarily capable of at scale. Like one person fine, but if you have an entire engineering team, that's probably not a sustainable outcome. What do you think, Paul? That was a lot.
This is awesome.
Time.
This is great, John. No, I really appreciate you taking the time to go through this, and I can't wait to start generating some emails with this. I'm going to take this back to the marketing team here and say, hey, look, we should be scraping some of our review sites a little bit more frequently.
You know, this is one actual nuance. The engineers will appreciate this. Down here in the config for Ascend, I actually have my credentials securely stored too. So guess what? I'm gonna remove my credentials after this, so you can't like use my account.
Run up all use all your tokens on
exactly.
ChatGPT. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Exactly.
No,
it will
good.
actually cost 6 cents actually to build, just so you know.
No, that's good. That's great.
ChatGPT tokens. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, no, this is awesome. Yeah, I really appreciate this, John, and you taking the time. And I know we're at the top of the hour and folks got to drop. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat. We won't get to all of them, but as we mentioned, we will definitely follow up offline. The other thing to note is that we're more than happy to chat about this kind of stuff. We just hop on calls a lot and run through some of the examples of what's possible and whatnot. I know, John, that's what you mentioned before. You're traveling the world doing this for a lot of our existing customers, prospective customers. And John built this entire pipeline himself too. So you're speaking to the person who's the actual practitioner. So if you'd like to have some conversations around this, please feel free to reach out and be in touch. And we would be more than happy to show you this and spend a little bit more time on what this looks like for all the folks that I know that have questions today that we're not able to get to. But
yeah, and it took about an hour just for the group. It took about an hour to build all of it, both demos in total. The ability of Ascend to do all the orchestration and handle all the stuff that is important, but it's toil. I'm not creating a table. I'm not like worrying about schemas. I'm just like doing queries and like doing Python. The efficiency that Ascend brings really plays out in these types of scenarios where putting something together that actually scales and works is really pretty easy as long as you're understanding what it is you want to do. So
super. All right. Thanks very much for that, John. And we'll go ahead and wrap it there. So if folks want to be in touch, please feel free to reach out. You can reach out to the emails that we'll send you post-webinar. You can reach us at www.ascend.io, and we'd be more than happy to continue the conversation around what you can do with AI in your data pipelines. And thanks all for your time, and we will talk to you on the next one. Cheers now.
Bye. Appreciate it.